an air quality experiment for Jacksonville. I know iChurch is all over the world. This is for our city, but we'll talk about things in a global perspective, nationally specifically. Over the past few years, I've noticed a trend on Jacksonville radio stations regarding the content of the music that is broadcasted and the artists that perform it. It seemed that there was a stark contrast between the content on some stations versus others. I began to take time to listen to various stations to see if this contrast was real or imagined. When I could no longer be sure that I was indeed, quote, hearing what I thought I was hearing, I decided to conduct an informal experiment to be certain. The experiment, how did it work? Step one, the experiment began by selecting a sample of 6 Jacksonville area radio stations that broadcast different genres of music that I liked. I selected the, quote, top stations for country, rock, classic hits, hip-hop and R&B, top 40 and pop, new rock and new and alternative rock. Step two, a random day was chosen to record all of the music that played on each of the stations within the same 24-hour period. Beginning at midnight on a Tuesday, stay with me together, we'll get there in a minute. You're itching, I know, we'll get there in a minute. Beginning at midnight on a Tuesday, on a random Tuesday, I was able to document every song that played and enter them into a simple spreadsheet. There were 849 unique songs played across the stations on that particular day. Step three, the next step was to compile the lyrics of each of these songs. This was accomplished by a combination of internet research and listening to the songs themselves. In total, there were more than 1,400 pages of lyrics. Each line of each song was then examined, step four, for occurrences of profanity, sexuality, violence, criminal activity, drugs and alcohol, misogyny, or denigrating women. Every occurrence was tallied, and each song was given an occurrence total. The totals of all these occurrences were then tallied for all the songs on the individual station that aired for that 24-hour period, step five. As an additional step, each of the content categories was sorted by artist, race/ethnicity. I wanted to see if there were any emergent trends between the race/ethnicity of the artist and of the content of the music that each station chose to broadcast. Let's look at it here. So out of all the songs in the world that people could have chose to broadcast on the radio, these are the songs that were picked, and these are the results. At the top of the circle there, new rock and alternative, 89 artists, 159 songs, 313 plays, including repeats. There's all the occurrences. To the right there's classic hits, number 2, then hip-hop and R&B, then country, then rock, then pop and top 40. You can take a moment and just kind of look. You can see the rankings of each one, who was number 1 in this or number 5 or number 7, how they ranked. And that's just one day, one Tuesday that we picked. I'll just give you a chance to look. And again, you can take these home. There's a lot to read. There's a lot of fascinating stuff. But going down to the bottom here of the page, in the very center of the bottom, you see a giant pie. And it says in that giant pie, artist by ethnicity. If you break the artists out by ethnicity, 75, 1, and 24, that's the breakdown. So they looked at music, and they found music by white folks, by black folks, and by a combination of other races, and they said, here's what we're going to put on the air. Not all of the music by black and white folks, but what they chose to broadcast, this is how they mix it up. They could have played any songs. This is the mix of what they played. Out of 390 artists, you see the breakdown. But then you go over to the left, and you start to see now, out of the music they chose to play, they could have chose anything. Here's what they chose. Profanity, the breakdown. Violence, the breakdown. Drugs and alcohol references, the breakdown. Criminal activity, the breakdown. Misogyny and sexuality. I didn't pick the songs. I didn't choose the songs. Somebody somewhere went through the entire available catalog of music, and this is what they chose. Now, let's go to the next page. There's 3 columns here. I'd like you to just join me in the center column. We'll look at the left and the right. I'll break it down for you. But you'll see a question at the top, and we'll go through it together. Never thought I'd hear that sound in church, all the newspapers. What'd y'all do today? Oh, we read the paper. It's kind of cool, I guess. And it asks a question. Are we really one nation under God? Let's see if America's really one. In the middle column, and again, we look at it, and again, you take this home, it'll probably take you 3 days to go through it all, but we'll just get through a little bit today. Homicide, center column, in our nation is something that should concern us all. For the past 10 years, roughly 3,000 Americans have died in homicides every quarter. January, February, March, 3,000. April, May, June, 3,000. That death toll is equivalent to experiencing a 9/11 attack every 3 months. Every 4 years, the number of Americans killed by homicide is approximately 50,000. Unless something changes, By the time President Obama completes his second term, and this will be true for Obama, Bush, or anybody, by the time they run their 2 terms, we will have experienced an American death toll nearly double that of the entire Vietnam conflict during just his presidency alone. 55,000 Americans died in Vietnam. It'll be double that. The combined American death toll from 9/11, the Iraq War, and the Afghanistan War is nearly 10,000 Americans. The number of Americans killed by homicide since 9/11 is over 140,000. Beyond the general horror that has been happening across our land, there is an evil twist that has gone largely unnoticed for a long time. Simply put, the pictures of pain and carnage that seem to dominate our national headlines present only a fraction of what is going on in our nation. In our country, now this is a statement about our country, black Americans are being killed at alarmingly higher rates than any other race and ethnicity. Black men die at greater rates, black women die at greater rates, black adults die at greater rates, black children die at greater rates, black elementary school, middle school children, and high school children die at greater rates. Black Americans lead in these categories year after year, every single year. Somebody say, you're trying to say something about black Americans? No, I'm trying to say something about America. For some reason, the story of this genocide is not nearly as gripping or sensational as the other tragedies that happen in our nation. The pain that these families feel, however, is no less real, and their losses are no less dreadful. Perhaps the excessive death rate among blacks in our country is no longer, quote, tragic because it is no longer news. Maybe it has become so normal that it is now accepted, possibly even expected. There is, in fact, an entire niche industry built around these homicides. The funeral homes provide the dignity. I've been to many services. The preachers provide the fiery sermons, and the airbrush artists create the T-shirts. This is a familiar drama that plays out every day in our nation, and all the players seem to know their parts. It may, for all I know, this is speaking for me, not for anyone else, be a good thing that the black homicides in our nations don't garner the same attention as the other horrific bloodshed in our land. If they did, we would never cease to fly our flags at half-staff. We would never have a day in which we didn't sit in front of our televisions and weep. The statistics on this page are not exaggerated or sensationalized. They are real. We'll look at them in a minute. There may be a slight variation in one direction or another depending on which national data tables are used. There may also be a variation in the final percentages and numbers depending on how the racial or ethnic lines are split. White alone, black alone, white Hispanic, black Hispanic. It's very complex. Regardless of which report you study, I believe you will conclude that America has work to do. As I've studied this subject for a number of years across a broad spectrum of data models and research methods, I can tell you that the situation is bad. Academics and sociologists may point and counterpoint each other in their successive reports and summaries, but the big picture of what is happening among certain groups in our nations remains grim, no matter how it is framed. I am content to leave the detailed analysis to people more educated than me. I dare not tread into matters beyond my learning. On the other hand, the human dynamic of what is happening in our nation is not possible for me to ignore. I do not feel that I can remain silent as I stare at such statistical and no doubt experiential inequity in our land. The information I presented here should be troubling to us as a nation. We'll look at it in a second, especially as a nation that aims for equality. If you consider these statistics to be somewhat suspect, we'll all stay together on the same page if you could, if you'd be so kind. The information that I presented here should be troubling to us as a nation, especially as a nation that aims for equality. If you consider these statistics to be somewhat suspect, I encourage you to do your own research. You may find a report from one sector or another to indicate that my findings are, quote, off. There is no need to challenge me on the fine points. I will not argue over the data. I stipulate here and now that I am neither a researcher nor a statistician. I am simply a human being that sees something in our national landscape that I feel we need to be honest about and address. Even if my charts and graphs are slightly inaccurate, I'm sure that every honest researcher will conclude that we cannot yet legitimately claim our nation is equal. My goal in presenting these statistics is not to amplify the suffering of one race while minimizing the suffering of another. My heart breaks for all people who are hurting in our land. I am not attempting to draw attention away from the pain of anyone, but rather draw attention to the pain of a large and growing segment of our population whose tears seem to fall to the ground largely unnoticed. Generally speaking, it seems that the only way a black homicide gains widespread national attention is when someone white is involved. I know this is not the message we intend to convey to many of the hurting people in our country, but it is certainly the message that many of them are receiving. Keep in mind that my writing here only highlights the statistical and existential disparity between blacks and whites in our nation. If I had the time and space to introduce the Hispanic and Latino components into the statistics, the evidence of our national unevenness would become even more apparent. It is my sincere hope that by addressing this disparity in a black-white context, we will be more open to an objective evaluation of our nation as a whole.